Today we're gonna carve a simple dachshund. And for this project you're only gonna need a piece of wood, a knife and a pencil. I'm using European aspen, but any kind of soft enough wood is good for this project. You can start this project with a piece of wood that's 1 times 1 inches thick or 2.5 times 2.5 centimeters, but it makes sense to split it in the beginning to be about 0.6 inches or 1.5 centimeters thick this way. I also started with a 1x1 piece of wood and just split it like this. But if you don't have the tools, you can just whittle it down to this thickness. The way we start this project is by making a line like this in the middle. The dog itself is going to be 2 inches long, so we're only going to need half of this block. Then we're going to draw another line this way in the middle. This is where the back is going to be. And then about 1/3 of the way between the edge and this line, we're going to make a line that's slightly slanted like that. The most important thing before we do any carving is that we leave enough space for the head. We don't want to end up in a situation where the neck is like here and then there's not enough space for a snout. And that is why we're going to make a very simple drawing of the head. About halfway between this line and the edge, we're going to make a straight line like this. And it's going to go slightly above the line that marks the back. And then we're going to draw a line like this. There's plenty of room here. There's a little bit too much room, but that's not a problem. It's better to have it that way. And then we're going to make a line like this. Now we know there's going to be enough room for the head. Then we can carve away this area, and this area. And we're going to start that with some V-cuts. On the back here, it makes sense to draw this edge of the head also on the top, so that you don't make a crooked cut. And then we can start with these V-cuts. I think it's easiest to start from these edges because a sharp edge like this is going to be easier to remove. Then we can move the V-cuts to the middle also. And now that we have a little bit of a distinction here already, we can also make rough cuts this way. Because we're not going to need any of this wood. We'll repeat this process a few times to get down to this line. Once you get closer, you can also cut this way, because these stop cuts are going to help with making this inside corner a little bit cleaner. This is good enough for now. As you can see, I left like 1 millimeter of wood over here, because at this point of the project it's better to leave a little bit of extra instead of cutting very close to the final size. Then we can move on to this part. There's many different ways you could take a piece of wood like this off. I like just making these push cuts or these push cut sweeping cuts. This is a pretty safe way where I know that I won't easily chip off this head. Because if I start pressing the blade into the wood from here, there might be too much pressure and the head might just chip off. Now as we get closer to the corner over here, we can make a few V-cuts so that we don't have to make these very, very tight sweeping cuts, because that's not going to work very well. Something like this is good enough for now. And then we can remove this area in a very similar way, except this is going to be much easier. The same little push cuts like that. I'm making very small cuts in order to keep an eye on the proportions so that I don't cut too much. Alright. Then about 1/3 of the way between this edge and this line, we're going to make a little corner like this. And that's going to be between the halfway point of this 1/3. So there's a line like this, and then the other line is going to connect to this line that marks the middle 1/3. And make sure that this is not too high. There should be significantly more wood over here than over here. I'm going to make this slightly lower. That's pretty good. And then we can make these edge lines on the bottom here and make a V-cut over here. Next we'll start to define the legs a little bit, and we'll do that by creating a simple curve over here, and over here. Then with just a few sweeping cuts like this, we can slim these parts down so that they start to be closer to the actual size and shape of the feet. This curve shouldn't go all the way to this inside corner. You should leave a little bit of wood over here. Now we can create some sharper inside corners. We can make one over here to separate the paws from the rest of the leg. So we're just making V-cuts. Like that. Then the same on the front here. Just be really careful here. It's better to press the blade pretty deep from here, so that then when you cut from this other direction, you can better avoid chipping the entire foot off. After that, we can make this chest area a little bit rounder, because the shape of the leg and the shape of the chest kind of go hand in hand, because there's this connection point over here that needs to be a little bit smoother. Okay, now the biggest problem with this shape is that there's just too much thickness over here, maybe even on the body, but we can start to slim down the head first and then see how much wood we need to leave over here. So, like this, from both sides, we can take away some of that extra thickness. We can also make the head a little bit pointy already. The tip of the snout is going to be way slimmer than this part of the head. That's pretty good. Then we can make all of these sharp edges round. One cut that's very useful for this is the stop cut, so we can make without needing to worry that we'll cut off the head. The kind of cut you're gonna need to use depends on the angle you need to cut from, so various different cuts are going to be useful. Next we're gonna define the basic shape of the ears. And for that, we're gonna draw a line like that. It starts from about the halfway point between the top of the head and where the neck meets the back, and then it goes over here below the level of the bottom of the jaw, and then just a straight line up like that. Not all the way to the top, but only about here. And then we do the same on the other side. Try to look from above so that you can make the ears symmetrical. And then we just make stop cuts. Like that. And like that. Now notice here that similarly to the front paws and the chest, removing wood from here not only affects the ears, but it also affects the rest of the body. So there's no point in me just removing wood from this small area over here. At the same time, I am able to see that a little bump is formed over here, but I can just smooth it out as I go. So it's not just about defining the ear, it's about defining the right proportions of the thickness of the head compared to the thickness of the body. So I can slim this entire thing down as I define the ears further and further. And then the front side works the same way, like that. And then the same on the other side. Try to be careful and make slow and controlled cuts. The blade shouldn't snap over here too hard, because that might cause you to split the ear or the entire side of the face off. Next we can make the limbs taper down a little bit more. So this point and this point should be slightly more inward. And then the same on the back. And then compared to this thickness, the body is way too wide. So we need to slim this down more. Try to make the body of the dog a little bit more round. Next we can draw a line over here, just this tiny curve, and the same on the other side, and that's going to separate the upper parts of the legs from the torso, and that's also where we can make these V-cuts. This will help us with making the sides of the dog rounder while leaving enough mass over here for the legs. By the way, at this point also, if you feel like you can't quite reach this far with your thumb and the cuts are starting to become tricky, you can just take off some of this extra wood. It's not good to cut off all of the extra yet, because it's gonna help you to hold on to the figure. But if there's too much and you can't make good pairing cuts like this, there's no reason to not take a few centimeters off. From this point forward, we mostly just do some refinement. So for example, over here, that's too big of a bump. This should go a little bit smoother. So I can do that. That's pretty good. And then over here, I can make the snout rounder with a few push cuts like this. Also from the top. I'm gonna create that pointy but still round shape for the snout. Also, there's a little bit of a flat area right beneath the nose over here. Next, we're gonna make a few very tight sweeping cuts over here. So I'm just sketching this curve. And these few sweeping cuts are going to create a distinction between the muzzle and the rest of the head. So the curvature is very tight at first, and then it turns flat. I'm also slimming down the entire front part of the face a little bit more to make it more proportionate. For this, it might help to look at some reference photos. Here I'm just making the neck a little bit slimmer from the back side, because to me it looked like there was just a little bit too much mass compared to the body. These sweeping cuts can also help with making this transition a little bit more curved instead of a sharp inside corner. Next we're going to separate the paws from each other, and that can be done with V-cuts. Like that. And then here on the back, I'm going to make those V-cuts with the tip of the blade. That's good. Then we can add a little bit of curvature to the legs and also take away the sharp edges at the same time by making a few sweeping cuts. I'm also making this part a little bit rounder. And then it's time to take away this extra bit of wood and make the tail. So it's better to leave a little bit of extra, something like that, so that then we have plenty of space for the tail. And you can remove this extra bit with a saw, or you can just make a few rough cuts. If you're doing this with a knife, then when you get closer to the end, you're also going to need to make some push cuts. And now we're getting to the point where we're going to start making the tail. So the first thing is we're going to mark where the hind limbs are going to end. And that's just going to be a curve like this. And here we can start by making some sweeping cuts. And once we have a pretty decent edge over here for the legs, we can make a curve for the tail, just something like this. And then we can just take off this unnecessary bit of wood. Push cuts work very well for this. Then we can slim the tail down even more. It's going to be a very narrow tail. And once it starts to look like it's about the right thickness, then we can emphasize the distinction between the tail and the hind limbs with these V-cuts. I'm going to take the tail even more inward so that we don't have to work on the area between the limbs. This will make the project a lot easier. Then this part needs to be made rounder too, more like this. I'm redrawing the shape that the leg was supposed to be and making a few sweeping cuts here and then cutting with the tip of the blade. This is almost like a V-cut with the tip of the blade, except that then one side is made with this curved sweeping cut motion. And then over here I'm just making a regular V-cut. Like that. And a little bit of rounding. And that's quite good. And then the same on the other side. I'm going to cut the tail to be just a little bit shorter. I'm going to do that with these V-cuts like that, and then I'm giving this tail just a little bit more curvature. And that's it for the project.